Hey guys, Mrs. Ott here. I'm here to teach you guys a little bit about completing the square. So this is just another method that we are adding to our arsenal of methods for solving quadratics. So far, we've learned about solving by graphing, where we looked at our parabola crossing the x-axis and we'd have two answers, right? We've also done factoring. We did factoring by grouping and then solved those. And that was when we were still in school, actually. And then we also just recently learned quadratic formula. So this is just one more method that you guys have for solving these quadratics. And actually, next year when you get into geometry, you will be doing some of this again. So this is something you want to kind of remember moving into next year in geometry. So the first thing before we actually get into completing the square, I want you guys to look at something you already know pretty well to kind of find a pattern to help us with completing the square. So think back to when we were still in school and we were talking about multiplying polynomials, or we were multiplying specifically binomials. So in this case, I'm looking at a bunch of binomials that are exactly the same, right? And multiplying them together. Like this one, I have two of the same thing. Here I have two of the same thing being multiplied together. A fancy way of writing that is kind of like this one down here, where I have x plus 6 squared. So that's something that we've already looked at before. Hopefully you remember a little bit about it. So x plus 6 squared, like I just said, is really just x plus 6 times x plus 6, right? There's two of them. Now, if I multiply that all out, I distribute, I'm going to get here, and I combine like terms, and I get my final answer down here, x squared plus 12x plus 36. Now, what I want from you guys is to try to figure out what the pattern is. If I wanted to, go straight from this x plus 6 squared and jump down to my answer, what's the pattern, or what's something that you notice? Well, I see that I have a positive 6 here, and my middle term of the trinomial down here is 12x, and the last term of my trinomial is 36. So how would I get from 6 to 12x? Well, 12x is really just the 6 times 2. Okay, so we just double the 6 and we get 12. To get the 36, what I would do is just 6 times 6, or 6 squared. Okay, so really this pattern that I need you guys to understand is to get the middle term, the 12x, you're multiplying the original number by 2, and then the 36, you're multiplying the original number by itself, or you're squaring it. Okay, so you're doing a lot of doubling and a lot of squaring. So keep that in mind. Over here, we're actually going to complete the square, what I told you guys we're learning today. So if you look at this first one here, it says x squared plus 8x plus blank. I want to figure out what goes in that blank to, kind of complete my perfect square trinomial. I want to figure out what goes in this factored form down here to kind of help me out. I have this already written down in the green. I want to figure out, okay, what number would go in here so I can fill in that last blank? Well, in the last example, we talked about the doubling and the squaring. So I know that the number that goes in this blank in the purple down here is really just whatever that is times 2 to get me 8. Okay, so the number times 2 to get me 8 would have to be 4. Now I can figure out what goes in this last blank over here by taking this number and squaring it, right? So 4 doubled is 8, and 4 squared is 16. Now I have my perfect square trinomial, which is this whole line, x squared plus 8x plus 16. Okay, let's do one more just so you can really understand it. So over here, I already have that green part filled out just to kind of help you. Remember, we're doing the doubling and we're doing the squaring. So some number doubled gives me negative 10. What number doubled gives me negative 10? Well, that's negative 5. Okay, then that negative 5 squared goes in the last blank, 25. Okay, so this part really is just the first example we did together, just kind of backwards. We're working backwards from what we did at the beginning. Before we were multiplying, now we're kind of dividing it out, all right? So let's actually solve one of these equations here. So it says solve each equation by completing the square. So I'm going to just do this highlighted one here. We want to complete the square here, do the doubling and the squaring to be able to solve for k, find out what k equals. And if you remember when we did a lot of the graphing or when we did quadratic formula or any of those things, we had two answers. So at the end of this, I'm looking for possibly having two answers, okay? So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of rewrite this like that last example we did. So k squared minus 8k, and then I know we're going to have a plus a blank here, and I'm going to write the factored form of this out down here to help me figure out what goes in the blank. Okay, so this blank, I need to have a number that when I double it, I get -8. So the number doubled that gives me -8 is -4. Okay, and then remember the pattern is doubling and squaring, so that number squared, -4 squared, is 16. There's our completing the square part. Okay, now the rest of this, we're just going to be solving this equation. All right, now this is an equation, so I need to fill in the rest of this. It needs to be equal to 9. Now notice how this line is almost exactly the same as this one. It's just now we have this plus 16 in there. So since I added 16 to the left side, I also need to add the 16 to the right side. Okay, a lot of times people forget that. Whenever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. All right, so really, if I factor the k squared minus 8k plus 16, I get this k minus 4 squared, right? And then on the other side, when I do 9 plus 16, I get 25. All right, now here comes the solving part. This part hopefully is the easier part. I have a squared that I need to get rid of, so I'm going to do the square root of both sides. Now this is where my two answers come into play. I have k minus 4 equals, now the square root of 25 is either 5 or it could be -5. Okay, reason being is because 5 squared is 25, but -5 squared is also 25. So you got to cover your bases. You got to make sure you get both. All right, so if I just look at the left side here, I add 4. I'm going to get 9. So k could be 9. Or if I add 4 on this one, -5 plus 4, I would get -1. So there's my two answers. So just make sure that you are doing both the positive and the -5, because if you don't, you're not going to get both of those answers. And you could always go to Desmos and, graph our original up here and check your answers. So you should get 9 and -1 on your graph. That's a good way to check. Okay, so that's solving by completing the square. I want to do one more that's maybe a little bit more difficult, just to make sure you got it. All right, so over here, it's the same, same setup. It says solve each equation by completing the square. Again, same problem, just different numbers here. Now, one thing I notice is we have a -2 over here, whereas like on this one when we started, we have the 9 on the right side. So in everything else that we've done, we've had this equal to 0, but when you complete the square, you want that number on the other side. So you don't want the 0 on the right side. You want to move the -2 over first. So I'm going to add 2 over first, and then I'm going to set up exactly like what we've been doing. Okay, I know the number that goes in this blank is going to be the number squared. Okay, I got to figure out what that number is first. That's going to go in that blank that I just made. Okay, and now on the right side, I have a 2, and I know whatever goes into this blank right here is going to have to also go here. Whatever you do to one side has to go on the other. Okay, so let's go ahead and start filling in some of these blanks. I know I need a number that when I double it, I get 6. That's going to go here. So the number doubled that gives me 6 is 3. When I square it, it goes in this blank. So 3 squared is 9. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do it to the other side. So when I clean up that right side, 2 plus 9, I get 11. Okay? That's my completing the square part. Everything we just did, that's your completing the square. The rest of this, we're just solving. So to get rid of the squared, I do the square root. So I have j plus 3 left on the left side. Now I can't do the square root of 11. I mean, I can. I'm going to get a decimal, but we don't like to write decimal. So I'm going to leave this as square root of 11. But just like the last one, how you could get a positive and a negative, you can also have a positive or a negative square root of 11. It's kind of like some of your answers when you do quadratic formula. So I'm going to leave that like that. And then I'm going to subtract 3 from each side. So j is going to actually be negative 3 plus or minus square root of 11. Only because I can't combine that negative 3 like inside of the square root of 11. It's kind of like they're almost not like terms. You can't put those two together. So you're still having two answers. You're going to have negative 3 plus square root of 11. And you're also going to have negative 3 minus square root of 11. So you still have two answers. They just look a little bit different. So that's completing the square. Hope you guys kind of understood what was going on. If not, you can watch it again or reach out to us. Let us know your questions, and good luck. Hope you're all doing well.